Hey, good morning, everyone. Let's get it on. It's Law and Legitimacy. It's, I think, Wednesday morning. It's Washington, D.C. And oh, my goodness, in the case of Gilligan's Island, it's day 41 in the United States of America versus Joseph Biggs. We made a little progress yesterday. We got a cooperating witness off the stand. It took about 5 days to do that. We'll turn to other more mundane witnesses today and maybe make some progress. You know, chipping away at this massive iceberg, hoping that it melts and I can get home for Easter. But, you know, the phone rang last night and lo and behold, you know, would I be interested in sticking around town for another J6 case that's set to begin in mid-April? And, you know, I'm thinking maybe. I mean,
you're gonna buy an apartment in DC. What's real estate looking like over there?
Oh, I wouldn't buy anything more at this point. I've got more than enough real estate in my life. It's time to, you know, I think downsize is the word that you're supposed to be thinking of when you're my age. And so, but I might need something more than an Airbnb. But, and it occurs to me it might not be a bad idea. I mean, I paid my tuition in the J6 Academy and now understand the nature of the government's case and evidence, at least as against the Proud Boys. The cases can't be that much different with respect to other defendants. But I don't know. There is a side drama going on that you may have become aware of on your social media feeds involving the J6 House Committee's tapes, in other words, the videotapes that they collected as part of its investigation. I'm still not sure what the truth is, but I can report the following reliably. Obviously, the House January 6th committee conducted an elaborate and massive investigation of what happened on the Capitol that day. And in the course of that investigation, they acquired videotapes from all sorts of sources, closed circuit television networks within DC, from people's phones, you know, wherever they could, they gathered information. And at a minimum, we're told that they have 14,000 hours of videotape collected about the events. Then last week or the week before, I can't recall, the number 41,000 began to surface. And the claim was that Speaker McCarthy had said he was going to make these tapes available to the public, but he cut a deal with Tucker Carlson. I was in touch with Tucker Carlson. It turns out that he thought he got 41,000 hours of tapes. If I know anything about Tucker Carlson, I know he's drinking from a fire hose trying not to drown. So I doubt he's viewing all these tapes. And so I thought, transposition error, 41. I bring it up with the United States government here in the Biggs case. A senior Justice Department lawyer tells me, no, it's 14,000. And the overwhelming majority of those have been received by the Justice Department and placed into a common database that all J6 defense lawyers have access to. There have been certain things that have been withheld and that even McCarthy withheld from Tucker Carlson. Among those would be videos of a certain confidential evacuation route. And the claim would be that disclosing this to the public at large might endanger the safety of those who might need to rely on that evacuation route come the next time. And therefore, since it shed no evidence or no light on evidence of import as to those accused with crimes on J6, it was being withheld. Don't know, you know, you never know what you don't know, but that's that. Well, this week, earlier in the week, this story took on yet another set of legs. And I was approached in the hallway by reporters from various entities and outlets saying, you know, are you going to ask for copies of the tapes from McCarthy? And, you know, my reaction was, well, probably not. I mean, even if I wanted 42 or 14,000 hours of new tapes, how exactly am I going to look at them when I'm in the middle of trial?
Yeah, well,
well, but look, Mike, this is the reality on the ground in D.C. One of the lawyers in one of the J6 cases yesterday filed a motion to adjourn, not our case, but to adjourn or delay or continue his case until he had a chance to view them all. And and so I get a copy of that from somebody. Are you guys going to file a similar motion? And I'm like, man, I got a witness on the stand here. I'm trying to think about him. At the end of the day, I see last night a vein of social media commentary that has reached the conclusion that a person, meaning a lawyer or any reasonable person who viewed all those tapes, would reach the conclusion that the FBI set up the whole January 6th event and is responsible for it, and that it was part of the deep state conspiracy to unseat Donald Trump that was associated with the well-coordinated effort to stop the steal, and so on. And that's just a bridge that I just don't see. I don't see myself walking because I don't see the evidence leading in that direction. Somebody asked me this morning, "Hey, whatever happened to Sidney Powell?" And you'll recall Sidney Powell, she have released the Kraken Powell. Very highly credible lawyer at one point in her career. She got Ted Stevens, former senator of Alaska's conviction overturned when she poured through files and did the hard work that would be required to review thousands of hours of tapes or communications, and learned that there were violations of the government's obligation to turn over exculpatory evidence in his case, such that his conviction was overturned. She also helped with General Mike Flynn early on in the Trump administration. And so when she started talking about the Dominion voting machines being jimmied, my first reaction was, "Oh, really? I don't buy that." But I was buying what Sidney had to say.
Right. We talked about this before, right? How credible and I guess impressive of an attorney and career that she's had, right? And that was sort of a line of demarcation in your perception of her is when she went publicly and stated that they were going to release the so-called Kraken.
Yeah, and so I waited, and I'm still waiting, and I've now reached the conclusion that Sidney took a walk on the wild side and never came back. And there is a I haven't had a career as glorious as hers, but I've had cases that that have attracted some attention from time to time. And one thing that you need to learn to do as a lawyer is to never be blinded by the Klieg lights. When the press is outside the courtroom and the shutters are clicking and everybody's asking what you think, they really don't care about you. They care about your client. And when lawyers become the story, lawyers inevitably fail. And it's important to recall that as a lawyer. And I think Sidney failed to her detriment. I worry that at the margins of the J6 cases, there is a narrative that will be accepted uncritically, and that is that the deep state and the anti-Trumpers engineered the theft of an election and sought to cover it up by driving him out of office on J6 with an FBI-inspired coup attempt, or seeming FBI-inspired coup attempt that they knew would fail and would be used to bury Trump once and for all. Here's a possibility that those folks should think about. There can be interlocking conspiracies. So in the case of the Proud Boys, they are charged with conspiracy to use force against the United States government. That is conspiracy to engage in sedition. That could, it's possible that there could have been such an agreement while the FBI simultaneously did whatever it did. There can be interlocking conspiracies. I don't believe there is proof that the Proud Boys engaged in a conspiracy, and I intend to argue that at the end of the case. And there have been some shocking developments in court this week from one of the cooperating witnesses in the Proud Boys case that give me both reasons for deep hope for them, but deep despair about what the law might do to them. And, I can't really say more about that at the moment without violating the rules about pretrial or extrajudicial publicity during trial, except to say, keep your eye on that case. It's going to surprise you in the end.
Well, one thing, Norm, if I may, because I'm here in North Carolina, and you and I meet every single day here for a wonderful half hour, and I know a little more than the average bear about the underpinnings of the case. But when I have to balance what I read and things that I see online, whether it's video, audio, text, or a combination thereof, I always have to draw myself back to the fact that you and the crew up there representing the 5 defendants who are also Proud Boys. And again, just to be clear, the Proud Boys are not on trial. It's the individuals who happen to be members of the Proud Boys are on trial for allegations of seditious conspiracy. And even if this broader contextual story or narrative that develops about some sort of organized federal law enforcement effort, as you just described, that does not do anything productive for the defense of those individuals, right? Because 2 things can be true, right?
Yeah, no, that's right.
That could all be have gone like that could have been going on at the same time as your clients could have separately been doing something that is unlawful, right?
Well, I mean, and again, I don't think my clients were, and I mean to assert that loudly and clearly. But yeah, it is possible. I mean, and the best analogy would be to say, suppose Mike, you and I were at a European soccer match, and at the end of the match, there was one of those soccer riots, right? And we started snatching purses, figuring people were paying attention, diving for the gates. Let's grab some purses, and we got accused of purse snatching. Would our defense be, but there was a riot, but somebody else started the riot?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, no. Exactly right. And so I worry, because there's a lot of wrought hand wringing in the hallways and in the DC courts right now by folks who are supporting the Proud Boys, and I'm happy to see the supporters there, and I'm grateful for their collegiality and their warmth. But don't be seduced for a moment. This is a high stakes trial inside, and the McCarthy tapes aren't going to save anybody. And it's a sideshow, and it's a sideshow that comes at a very propitious moment, because what starts here today in DC but CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee's annual meeting, and it's got a star-studded list of speakers. I've decided I'm going to go on Friday and Saturday. I've never been to such a thing, but there'll be Vivek Ramaswamy. He'll be speaking. Donald Trump will be speaking. Steve Bannon will be speaking. I'll go for just forensic interest there. And there'll be people who identify as conservatives from across the country looking for hope, and maybe looking for hope in all the wrong places. We'll find out that on the eve of the 2024 election. And, McCarthy's office fought back savagely against claims that they had not, in fact, distributed these tapes publicly. I've heard privately that his lobbyists and supporters were all over journalists trying to present a half-truth as the whole truth, that his disclosure to Tucker meant that he'd honored some commitment to the American people. And it's his caucus that has now said to defense lawyers in J6, call us, we'll give you the tapes. I don't know how this is going to play on the floors of CPAC. I think the Republican Party is going to be looking for a narrative to carry itself into the 2024 election. And my understanding of CPAC is this is where contenders get a chance to come out and strut their stuff and try to create some buzz prior to the New Hampshire caucus, or the New Hampshire primaries, and the Iowa caucuses in the early struggles for recognition and donors. So, I'll be a tourist at CPAC. I'm a little nervous about it. I'm just a courtroom lawyer and a part-time blabbermouth here on the air. But I'm kind of looking forward to going there, eyes wide open, and hoping I don't get run over by some sort of ideological truck. So stay tuned for reports, and I'll tell you what I can.
One thing to just tease moving forward, because we do have some activity on our Twitter account. Check our mentions, and it's tough to always engage, but we've got a couple of people who have been listening to our streams, who have heard my promotion, or at least my interest in early impressions of Vivek Ramaswamy. The issue of natural-born citizens is a legal topic that some people are very interested in hearing us talk about, Norm. And this stretches back to the Obama birtherism stuff. All the way forward. It involves Nikki Haley and, of course, Vivek. So at some point, I think maybe later this week or early next week, I think you and I should spend a little more time diving into the legal precedent there, how our Constitution evolved, post-Revolutionary War and separation from England, English common law, etc., and then what it means to be a natural-born citizen, and whether the American public have been lulled to sleep about what the true nature of that mandate ultimately is with respect to holding the highest public office in the country, which is the president of the United States.
Yeah, I've seen that stream as well, and I'm aware of one particular individual who's just apoplectic with me, and I get notes on an almost daily basis. When are you going to stop talking about other things and start talking about this? So this is a hat tip in your direction. I've taken a look at the law a little bit there, and we will do a segment on it. But it's an undeveloped area of American constitutional jurisprudence. We've not yet had a Supreme Court case decided once and for all in the context of a presidential election because it hasn't had to. But my initial impression is for purposes of current law, you're a citizen if you're born of a citizen, even if you were born on foreign soil. And in the case of Mr. Ramaswamy, his parents may not have been born here, but he was. And you're a citizen if you're born on United States soil, hence the phenomena of anchor babies, people coming to the United States from afar to have their child born here so that they could acquire dual citizenship. Now, the concern of the founders was that we could have a president who wasn't loyal to the United States, and therefore we wanted a natural born citizen to assure that that person had both feet in this continent. And the anchor baby phenomena illustrates, for example, that it's possible to be a citizen but not have both feet in the continent. And so, you can see that there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm on my face about the topic, because at least in the Obama era, I recall once debating Jerome Corsi. I think he's a Harvard political science PhD. We were on a Florida radio show. I'd called in. He may have been down there. And, I'd read his book on Obama and Obama's birth certificate and whatnot. And to me, it was nonsense. I didn't think there were good reasons to believe that President Obama wasn't born in the United States. And I took the current state of the law to mean if you were born here, you were as much of a citizen as I am. I was born here, at least so my birth certificate says. I don't recall the event. It struck me in the Obama case as a smokescreen for racism. That no one was prepared, that people like Corsi were unprepared to accept Obama and were looking for a reason to disqualify him. And it struck me, and I believe to this day, that they were unprepared to accept him because he was black, and they were looking for any reason that would do, and this is the best one they could find. And so we created this whole birtherism thing that just bugs me. And so, yeah, we'll get back to it.
Well, yeah, we definitely will get back to it. T-Girl wants to know if you'll be in a MAGA hat by Monday.
I don't think so. But I might buy one just to have as a souvenir. It's funny. I do a lot of walking around town here to try to get some exercise in, and there are souvenir shops, one near the White House, where you can buy an FBI hat. FBI. And so I've been toying with the idea of buying one and walking into the courtroom with it. But to date, I've been too cheap to do so. So T-Girl, I don't know. Only time will tell. Only time will tell. Hey, so let's go. Let's. I don't even know where to turn. There are a few places to go. What about this potential for a change of rules for college football? I mean, I saw a story in Sports Illustrated this morning. The goal is to shorten college football games. I sort of reject the idea. I think we need college football 12 months of the year. It's the only thing that I can bear to watch on television, and I love it. The idea of shortening the game, I guess it doesn't mean shortening the season. It probably means getting more games in a fixed quantity of time, which is more revenue for the league. But if we're going to shorten anything, and I date myself here, I think we should get rid of these reviews, on the field reviews of plays, where there can be a challenge, or the referees can ask the booth to review something, because they do go on too long. And the fact is, as Theodore Roosevelt once famously said, life is strife, and in the strife of athletics, we let referees and umpires and whatnot make the calls on balls and strikes and fouls and not, and they're often going to err, and I get that. But the notion that somehow we need to get everything exactly right in a sporting event, and to take the game out of the hands of referees to assure that happens, it doesn't always work, because we can all look back at plays and still argue whether the referees and those who reviewed the referees got it right. But it does detract from the enjoyment of the game. I recall one game this year where within the course of 10 minutes they reviewed 3 plays, and it's like, play the DAMN game, folks. I want to win. Well, I don't play anything anymore other than law, but I want my team to win, and I want the refs to get it wrong on my benefit.
Well, similar to what you said earlier, Norm, when the attorney becomes the story, right, or becomes the focal point of any sort of ongoing litigation, that is typically a bad sign. And I think that that's also a bad sign for sports. So this sort of review process that's been injected into nearly every professional sport, and any sort of collegiate sport of public interest, namely football, we've got that same sort of problem where the officials have taken a larger mind share, which is not what people are there for. That's not the product that people are investing in, and especially with their fandom. I wanted to, the NCAA.
Well, let me just quickly say one anecdote, Mike, and then we can get back to the NCAA. I see this in judicial proceedings, like in the Alex Jones case. The judge we had was very camera happy, and she was very concerned about how she appeared in the public at large, and she was very concerned about whether she be perceived to have lost control of the proceedings. And I just recall saying to my adversaries at one point, when you go to a baseball game, nobody gives a shit about who's calling the balls and strikes. And when a courtroom proceeding becomes about the judge, like Lance Ito in the OJ case, that's an epic fail. But anyhow, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that the NCAA is an embattled organization, and I'm clear on I have zero respect for the NCAA. I think it is one institution. Many people in the United States can agree lacks any shred of legitimacy at this point. I don't see the NCAA as lasting very much longer, especially if the SEC is capable of pulling in more teams. I think that the SEC will eventually supplant the NCAA, or at least make it less relevant. But that's
no. I think the Big Ten is going to do that. I mean, let's not have regional bias.
Like a true Michigander. Anyway, and I'm an ACC guy. Go Wolfpack.
Okay.
But this story to me is interesting because Sports Illustrated says that they're meeting in Indianapolis to discuss the possibility of rule changes, quote, to improve player safety and shorten games. And I'm calling BS on improving player safety. Shortening games is nothing more than what it actually gets at the bottom of this article, where it says the NCAA plans to eventually transition to a 12-team playoff. That's all this is about, is preserving how much energy and preserving the endurance over the course of a long football season, so that they can better monetize this ever-expanding college football playoff. And to say that it's anything related to player safety, yeah, maybe you're reducing the risk profile by shortening the games to say that maybe there's a lesser likelihood that a player is going to get hurt.
But mind you,
or less time.
They're not calling for shorter quarters, are they? It's still going to be 4 15-minute quarters, correct?
Right now, and they talk about this, right? So they're talking about the idea of a running clock. And this just gives me strong rec league vibes, right? Like, just keep the clock running, no matter what. I don't like that at all. But ultimately, I think that really what they're trying to do is make these games a more concise product, so that players are exposed to the field less, and there are more instances of their ability to monetize a new game. I don't think the fan experience is going to be enhanced by this, and that's where I come from with a lot of these, with a lot of my opinions on this stuff, is that if you're monetizing these things, customer experience, fan experience is the leading indicator. And
so how far are we from unionization of players? When you're talking about monetizing the game, I'm thinking, is it any coincidence that this conclave. When I went to Purdue as an undergraduate, we called Indianapolis India No Place, and because of what's going on there with NCAA rule changes, the worthies in India No Place, are they doing this in part because players need to protect their name, image, and likeness revenue now as well? And how are we just a step or two away from players' unions?
I think we are, but the NIL, the name, image, and likeness movement that has been spearheaded really at the high school level, is going to take care of a lot of this. I don't know. I think that there's an argument to say that you don't shorten games, in anticipation of an expanded college football playoff. You eliminate the field of teams that could potentially play for it and scrutinize heavily. Because I'm thinking about the national championship game this past year and what an absolute the college football playoff this year. And I think it was TCU that just got absolutely routed as one of the Final Four contenders. And these things are highly predictable, right? I talked about the SEC. Not for nothing, you can look every year at the NFL draft and see the representation of something like the SEC in far larger proportion than you can see any of these other smaller conferences. That's because the players are better. They're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, and they're hungrier. Right. And they come from better programs. That's just the reality. This sort of egalitarian notion that we're going to extend the potential for a national title to some obscure team in, Corpus Christi or something like that on the level of football is asinine. I really think this is only money. And I think that the NCAA continuing to just kind of, put its finger in the middle of this pie is only going to lead to its eventual demise. And its demise might come in part because of the SEC, and it might, Norm, to your point, come in the form of a players union. And I don't know what happens to the product at that point. I kind of think that it would, I think that might be the beginning of the end. But again, I'm very anti-union on this side. I don't think that unions embody a whole lot of positive attributes within a capitalist framework.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to take a position on that, at least as regards the NCAA. But I am going to say to the worthies in India No Place, if you want to, the only rule change that we are endorsing, and I haven't talked to Mike about this, the only rule change that I am endorsing is eliminating the senseless and endless booth reviews of calls on the field. Because, I know the standard for reviewing a play usually has to be indisputable video evidence. And I spend at least 5-10 minutes a game listening to commentators talking about whether the videos that I'm endlessly watching present indisputable video evidence. And then 80% of the time they make the right call. 20% of the time they're surprised. 100% of the time I'm thinking, just let the kids play and get the refs out of the game.
That's right. Well, and ultimately, I think that's what's creating this pressure point for leagues like the NCAA to come up with these rule changes, right? Because these games are lasting longer, but ultimately the fan is just getting super bored with actually, paying attention on TV. I mean, imagine being there in the stands for these games forever, right? I'm not 18, 19, 20 years old anymore. I can't really be bothered to stand for 4 quarters at a game that's going to go longer just because some refs are, having to abide a certain rule about booth review replay and et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see changes. I think that every league is looking at ways to sort of productize in a different way and innovate to adapt to the evolving mind share and I guess what we could call attention span of Generation Z, because that's ultimately what they're poising for, right? Older generations are on their way out. Newer generations have different priorities and different attention spans, and they're more likely to pay attention in small spurts. I don't think a proposed rule change to make it 12 teams is ultimately what in a running clock is what's going to give them that.
Well, I mean, the Western civilization is clearly coming to a collapse because we're adding USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, and we already had more than 10, so the Big Ten is going to be 16. But hey, lots going on in the U.S. Supreme Court this week, and we've ignored it all. So be ready for a momentous May and June when we have another series of decisions devoted to the structure and function of the United States government. The two cases were argued this week that we haven't talked about. One, student loan forgiveness and whether that exceeds the authority of the executive branch to unilaterally say as to this congressionally mandated program, never mind, you don't have to repay. And the second was as to the Consumer Product Safety Board and whether it was set up in violation of the Appropriations Clause of the United States Constitution. That board, which was, I believe, the brainchild of Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, is funded by monies from the Federal Reserve. And so questions arise in a federal system of limited power. If Congress has the power of the purse, can we really be diverting money without congressional approval from the Federal Reserve System, which operates in a murky gray zone in the constitutional structure anyhow, to this board and give it regulatory powers? The Biden loan forgiveness program, this was an assertion of something that we're deeply suspicious about here at LAL, and that is emergency powers taken by any branch of government. In this case, Biden decided that, I guess, incident to the pandemic and the need to jumpstart the economy and to provide more money for people to survive in lean times, the federal government was going to forgive student loans. Well, now, question presented, does that exceed his emergency powers? The question may never get decided because there's a standing issue. And the court, it took 4 members of the Supreme Court to conclude that this issue was, quote unquote, cert worthy. That is, worthy of being granted a writ of certiorari so that it could be heard by the full court. It'll take 5 to hold that to decide one way or another. Amy Coney Barrett is a lawyer's lawyer. She's very deep into procedural questions, and she may or may not go with the majority or with those who think that there is standing for a standing for the parties before the court to raise the issue. Standing usually means that a person has a direct interest in a case or controversy before the court, and it's a doctrine that limits the court's reach to parties who are aggrieved in cases or controversies that are justiciable. That is, that are capable of being decided in a meaningful way by the court. So we'll return to these topics perhaps later in the week, but I see that we have talked our way through another half an hour of that limited quantity of stuff that we all experience called time. Thank you.
Yeah, the Biden stuff, just a couple more facts as we get out of here. If the standing issue is something that the movements survive, we'll be looking at the major questions doctrine, and that doctrine and it emanates out of the EPA and from 2015. I think we've talked about it before, but essentially it gets at what you were saying before, Norm. Did the executive branch exceed its authority to meddle in the business reserved for the legislative branch, right? Congress. And that's a big question, right? $10,000 relief, $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients. There's I think a companion case where there is someone who is challenging it that is not really ripe for a standing challenge. It is an individual, I think a couple of individuals who are saying that they took private loans, and also just because there's a disparity in the way that Pell Grant recipients are being treated under this, they should get the full 20 of relief rather than 10. Altogether, we're looking at more than $400 billion of debt that would be wiped away.
And that's just a start. I want a tax credit for the student loans I repaid years ago,
That's
and
right.
I want it adjusted for inflation,
And then tomorrow we'll pick up on Christopher Wray, the FBI director, I guess, underwriting the current lab leak theory that the rest of the country has been, has accepted for the last 3 years, but we're called conspiracy theorists. So we'll get to that tomorrow.
That's right. We'll talk about the deep state's attempt to subvert the legitimate interests of the American people. This is Norm Pattis channeling Alex Jones with Mike Boyer. Thank you for listening to Law and Legitimacy.
See you tomorrow, Norm.
See you.